Written during the period of 1845 to 1862, Les Mis is an epic and historical novel taking place in France, detailing the transformation of Jean Valjean from a governmentally designed thief to an honest man. Valjean stays ahead of Javert, a police officer who obsesses with enforcing laws that he does not realize the assumptions he is making in his life. Valjean also raises an adopted child, Cosette. So, Valjean, the type of person he is so brutally honest that he just spills out compassion and love. The author, Victor Hugo, takes Valjean and puts him in jail for a very simple reason, yet, after getting out, allows certain events in his life to take place and help fulfill his promise to being an honest man. And that is a recurring theme in this book. Not the honest man part, but the importance of love and compassion. The author basically takes this theme and applies it everywhere, even in the best example of Valjean adopting and taking care of Cosette. This, as a mood in the story, makes us feel very somber or sullen. Even though Hugo writes these events as predominantly happy scenes, they still have a very mute and sorrowful undertone that comes out to the readers. To me, personally, of course. This leads to me thinking about when I thought about the book. This first thing that relates to me is Bishop Myriel, who kindly and compassionately forgives Jean Valjean for his actions on stealing the silverware that was in the church. It relates to me very much, as I too am also very forgiving on actions that others do, out of spite, of course. But in the case of Valjean, he needed to steal as he had an inclination to. He just got out of jail, he didn't have any money, so he had to steal. Although through the narrative, it actually touched my heart. Fantine, Eponine, Cosette, as a child, Javert, and Jean Valjean each left a loving impression in my mind as the book progressed. To relate to Valjean, I would have to take a child's perspective on it. Even though I am a child, I am subjected to authority like Valjean was subjected to being branded. He was subjected to the government. He's also subjected to the social outlook on him as a criminal. So even though this is also one of the themes from the book, the power of authority and social injustice. Even though the preface or the author's note kept items like this, that kept the themes here are more relevant, more now than ever in society, and they will always be relevant. We go to the news, you see tons of evidence of this, and it happens when people are basically around other people, and other humans have the nature of tribing and sticking together, and pack nature takes over. But Les Mis as a story is actually a really good book, and we still have to contemplate. It's still being studied, and what does this book mean? For me, it's a story of savior and sacrifice. What will it be for you? You should check the book out. Child. That wasn't right. Okay. So, The Dwarfing of Childhood by Physical and Spiritual Night is more of a complex issue presented by the preface of Les Mis today than previously. There are more distractions today than ever, such as phones and more political ideas too. And it's harder for children to contain themselves without these distractions. But let's actually simplify the question to a more discussable one instead of a social issue. How does the upbringing of children influence their views? The influence of a political idea may give kids more mixed feelings, but they still acquire a ton of items and ideas from their parents. I actually reference the Child Encyclopedia from Parenting Skills, and which talks about and looks at resources of research on development of children through perspectives of their parents. You need to think about this topic to change how you further interact with children, or if you're still a child, you're still developing, because you're at a developmental stage where changes in ideas or thoughts can push you into a direction, or as people call it, a phase. Of course, everyone knows that children are heavily impacted by what their parents do or think. Even just look at religion or traditions. Most babies that are a certain religion stay that religion until they have a further impacting idea. Well, but research is always being done. But the definition of a normal childhood is actually regional, meaning the reports and research data that can be collected are actually different based on cultures. We live in America, but there are so many different cultures here, regional diasporas, which actually change the way a child is brought up. Me being brought up, I was basically transported from one country to another, and that kind of screwed with a lot of things mentally, because I totally new place. I didn't have any friends back there in India, and none here. But if you look at the Igbo of Nigeria and compare it to what I've heard in the USA, the Igbo child actually developed freely, and their children can be left alone and walk freely at the age of 3, which is kind of weird. I've never actually heard. I doubt any 3-year-old here. I don't know anyone, but I doubt any 3-year-old here can do that. They walk freely at 3 and talk to friends because of, in Nigeria, however, they're actually part and they're actually integrated into that domestic society. That also plays into the need for more children to support the family, as such happens in developing countries, and also countries with lower mortality rates. Speaking of mortality rates, last year I actually did research on child development in sub-Saharan Africa and Western Africa, and so the low rates of child development actually comes from the influence of poverty. Poverty is the biggest key, which we can also see in Les Mis. The degradation of poverty and this whole cycle of staying in poverty. JBJ actually never got the silverware from the priest or the bishop, he wouldn't have actually become what he is now. He would have stayed. He wouldn't have had the motivation, or he wouldn't have a certain boost to get out of the poverty circle. And so, if you look at actually a different example, the Semite from Malaysia, it is a different culture, but it's also nomadic. But their children, they treat their children like babies, and they don't use them in every day-to-day work because they don't need to. Although it is nomadic culture, they produce less children because they have to move around. But they don't give their children work because it may harm their child. And so we get it, yes. We have to raise the child initially without work, and according to Gusex research from the University of Toronto, parents also have a hard time working with children solely based on their attitude. Like if a parent who gets very frustrated talks to a child, talks to their own child, and tries to, goes to the doctor, hey, I'm talking to you. The doctor says, yeah, you can talk really nice to your child. And when he gets home, all that goes out of his mind. He'll continue talking bad to his child. And the child may interpret it as negative or cold. But this type of anger in parents can't actually be fixed. It can, but research says it most likely isn't going to be fixed. But this is just growing up. Your parents may initially play a role, but research from Stanford in 1961 shows that children actually interact with other individuals the way they were taught from their parents. So when you were born and a couple of years after that, the way your parents talked to you and taught you to talk to other people is your first inclination to talk to other people. This whole article is just interesting, and its title is interesting in the way it's written.
do children just take their parents' political beliefs? It's not that simple. It argues that children actually may remain with the given beliefs, but will actually have a higher change in rebelling than exactly. So, if a child was brought up conservative, they actually may have a higher chance of rebelling against being conservative. So there's a specific example within it showing a conservative man whose parents were liberal. Like the man is conservative, his wife's conservative, his children are conservative, but his parents were very liberal. And so when he was 16, he was given the choice, hey, do you want to stick with liberal or do you want to go to church? And he picked going to church, and now he's an avid churchgoer. So the research shows that instilling political ideas early on, where there was an example of children already knowing that taxes must be raised, like this is instilling an idea already into children's heads, may actually cause more rebellion in the future. But it also depends on the type of beliefs. If children are exposed to more, conservative, more like diehard beliefs, they're more apt to keep their beliefs due to the manner of strong exposure. And so we could see children. We also have to. One thing we can't see right now is how children in school get affected by, school type academic liberals, like because a lot of institutions are liberal. And so this actually shows how children can base their political views just simply on the first few years of their life from their parents. But then again, there's always a counter argument to my claim, and it shows more. Of course, my research question would be more of a how than why. And so I think this is how children actually grow up with political beliefs. So it's an argument for me would be a different influence on the political belief for children. There's so many other factors, and I've only talked about one. You could have age, academics, and probably even the country. Like, what if the child lives in a totalitarian regime and probably wants a democratic society when they get close to the age of 20 or something? And so I was also reading another research which talked about countries with higher populations of individuals under the age of 20 than older population. The combined total older population actually leads to revolt. And so that's kind of intriguing because it connects to this. So there are actually many other different methods, but just as important is parenting and effective parenting. Children to decide on many of their decisions. The real dwarfing of childhood is dwarfing a child's perspective on the world, and not letting them choose one for themselves is not a solution, actually. They need to live life and experience the ideas they need. You can't single-handedly show your child the world. Your child has to see the world for himself or herself.
You know what? Books are awesome, except when they have holes in them. Plot holes, holes in conflict, or even holes in theming and or story. But this is not the case with Holes, the book, the awesome book by Louise Sachar. Unlike how it is written, the main character, Stanley Yelnats, is cursed with a very horrible life from his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather, and has now been unjustly sent to the boys' detention center in Camp Green Lake for not committing a crime. Whoa, say what? Yeah, that's right. Stanley Yelnats was sent to juvenile detention camp for a crime he did not commit. Him and the other members there are forced to dig dirt holes every day for the rest of the time they spend there. It's to build ethical, moral support. That's what the warden says over there, but let me tell you, it's not the case. But it sounds tough though, right? Every day making a hole. I like the book though. It was amazing in the way the author thought of using holes in a detentional facility, where in real life it wouldn't happen that way. The author basically created a full narrative story out of a dried up lake with a mountain on the side. Hint, of course. But you could see that even though Stanley's digging holes all the time, he still has certain characteristics that make him a very valuable and dynamic character. But in a camp, of course, with a bunch of boys, you put them together and you will reveal a couple of underlying themes and truths from the book. From almost every language arts class we've ever taken, the theme that presented itself to me was fate and destiny. Similar to any Greek work, where there's an oracle, or the Odyssey. Stanley had no control over his curse, which was, he had no control over his curse, which sent him to juvenile detention. But his courage and friendship that he exhibited at Green Lake with a boy that didn't really speak, Hector Zeroni, I don't want to spoil it, while climbing up a mountain, really are shown throughout the book. The author, of course, said himself that he had no intentional theme or moral from it. So this is something that me as a reader inferred for myself. So I really do recommend this book to anyone. True friendship, true passion, yet different and multiple perspectives. It is told from 3 narrative standpoints, and as any cursed from a previous generation story, any similar story like this, the initial curse has to be shown, and that shows the downfall of character. That's like the first generation that creates the curse. But you have to read it carefully and understand when and where who is talking and in what perspective. Constantly switches. You have to and in this modern era, the book actually does reference racial tensions. It was very weird reading about it. There was some heavy racism back then, and it is an important part of our history. We should not forget it. But even now, we experience a bit of racism, and it's still a problem that questions one's self-identity. Although every other scene was still a step forward in the solution of the curse. It was a step forward in solving the conflict. You should get the structure by now. I did notice that the whole book is actually a learnable, metaphorical experience. No matter how cursed you are, you have to persevere and get out of the hole that you dug it yourself. Although the author didn't really mean that relates to the character and how he relates to me personally, which I connected to. I personally persevere even though life isn't okay. I remember one time I went to a camp, not digging holes camp, but camp, and it was not good. Every day I woke up, I felt like I don't want to do this today, but persevered, and I think that kind of makes me feel better about reflecting back on it. So I do recommend this book. Go ahead, check out a copy, but make sure keep all your promises. You don't want to get cursed too. Thanks.